This is Optometrics Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of multi-practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Today's guest is someone that brings a unique perspective to the show. He's an accomplished optometrist with a passion for delivering exceptional patient care and helping fellow optometrists elevate their practices. His expertise spans glaucoma, dry eye, macular degeneration, diabetes, and myopia control. Beyond his practice, he helps optometrists grow the medical side of their businesses by building evidence-based disease protocols, optimizing billing and coding strategies, and integrating vision and medical insurance. He's a founder and lead optometrist at Good Life Eyecare and consultant at iCode Education. Please welcome Dr. Kyle Klute. Kyle, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And, the podcast is called Optometrists Building Empires, and optometrists are doing it a lot of different ways. And so I'm excited to get into your story, and we'll kick it off with, what was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
Yeah, great question. I think it starts with me being just really clarifying my own mission or core values. And it stems back from a lot of my experiences. I came out of residency, disease residency at a VA hospital. And honestly, when I got into practice, I was hoping that I would never have to fit a single patient in a contact lens. I was hoping that I would never have to see a pediatric patient. And my first 3 years were spent at a referral clinic where I saw basically just all glaucoma patients, dry eye. And I was working with a good friend, he's still a good friend and a mentor of mine, Bob Vandervoort. And just seeing like his relentless pursuit of excellence is probably the best way to describe Bob. And the way that he would practice optometry, and he had so much belief about the value that he provided for patients, so much belief about the care, the importance and, excellence of optometry, and how just really good, thorough eye care can really impact people. I mean, I was really, that really put a big impression on me. And it really just helped me understand, like, okay, he clearly has a high pursuit of excellence. So like that's one of his missions and core values. But as I left the practice and got more into primary care, my desire was to take that same kind of relentless pursuit of excellence in patient care and apply that to primary care optometry. And so I wanted to be able to practice in a way like he did, full scope optometric care, but at the primary care level, where I realized that actually it's really good for that type of care to be at a place where I can also fit a -2 contact lens on a patient, and not only help them with some of the more routine things of glasses and contact lenses, but if I can also apply my expertise in disease management, kind of funnel that energy towards preventing that disease and then managing it in a full scope manner for that patient and their entire family. I mean, that's what kind of drives me today in my own kind of pursuit of excellence as well. And so, I mean, going back to what I said about mission, core values, I think what's most important for me is just clarifying what does that look like for my own life and my own career. And that's probably been the most helpful thing.
Tell me a little bit more about, because I heard you say, hey, this wasn't really on my radar, and then it got on your radar. Elaborate on that transition a little bit more. Like, what really, it sounded like there's something there that changed. Can you help us understand your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one part of this big part of the story is my son. He was 3, I was being not a good optometrist in terms of like seeing our children. We need to see our kids by the time they're, 1 or 2, take a good look. And I hadn't done an eye exam on his eyes for until he was about 2.5, 3. He was would have been like 10 years ago or so. But, I was sitting there and I was scoping, I was doing retinoscopy, I was scoping his right eye, and I kept clicking, if you can picture me, I'm scoping his right eye and I'm clicking the phoropter and I keep adding more and more plus, more and more plus, more and more plus. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting up to like, I'm starting to sweat because I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, like I should have examined his eyes, probably 1 to 2 years ago. And here he is, he's almost 3. And I'm scoping about it. He was about a +6, -2 in the right and a +3, minus in the left. And he was about 20/70 at that time in the right eye, best corrected. And he's got some anisometropia. Uh, but my kind of narrow-minded, I guess that was me, my narrow-minded focus on I'm just going to manage dry eye glaucoma and the worst of the worst stuff. Kind of that mindset kind of shattered in that moment of thinking that that's the only real value I could provide to a patient, realizing in my own son, like, oh, wow, this is really important too. To have to be able to perform these types of eye exams on kids and being diligent and preventative for peds eye care as well. So the combination of that plus just the excellence in the disease aspect of things made me want to bring that whole package to my own practice, Good Life Eyecare. And as I've done that for the last, 5, 6 years, I've created protocols to manage those conditions, all the conditions we possibly can at the primary care level, to their fullest extent.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. How'd you feel when that happened? I mean, it must have been kind of like, oh man, it slapped. It probably didn't feel good, right? You kind of hit it
No,
on that.
honestly, I'm embarrassed to even talk about it right now. You know, like in the moment, your first, your own son. I've got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, but your first child, and you're sitting there, you're scoping, and you're realizing, this isn't the end of the world, but he's got amblyopia very clearly, and you're just wondering, okay, he's 3, so we caught it fairly early. It's going to be totally fine. He's going to improve vision, but are we going to have to do vision therapy for him? Or we're going to have to do drops. What does this look like for him? And it also just shows like, uh, we learn so much in school and we can kind of approach things from an academic level, right? From a detached level. But then when it's our own child, it's the same
Yes.
thing as like, when you have dry eye, you're going to be way more sympathetic and preventative for helping patients with dry eye. When you have a parent or somebody with glaucoma, just like that personal interaction with it. For me, just that feeling of like my child's going to have to get glass. Yeah, I mean, I've been wearing glasses since I was in 2nd grade myself, but just the journey of having your first, your own child wear glasses is an emotional thing. So, just realizing that all these things are important steps in our patient's journey.
Yeah.
So, as I was experiencing them myself, I've always enjoyed like the teaching and aspect of things. So whenever I can experience something like that, I want to figure out how I can turn it into a way to impact others and teach others along the way as well.
I think that's a great, I think that's a great call out. And I appreciate you sharing that story. I think that's, uh, uh, it's interesting because it's almost like, do you think you would have came to that same conclusion over time? You think it was kind of inevitable path, or do you think that this really steered in a completely different direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think is probably inevitable just because the, I like to have um I like to kind of be the jack of all trades. I like to be able to do as much as I possibly can for my patient. So, there's an appeal, I guess. There's an appeal in me, and I think there's an appeal in our profession, and I admire that. And we need specialists in our profession. We need people that just focus all their time on glaucoma patients and dry eye,
Yep.
and I get that as well. But there's also a really big need for patients to experience like that same level of expertise in a lot of different areas for them just because of the nature of eye care. And that's what I found is like, I think I came out of school and came out of my work in a specialty clinic as really just um, in this was probably a fault to my own of just my own understanding, but just kind of siloing diseases, chronic diseases, and not realizing how much overlap there really is, and then how much impact you can have on a patient when you can simultaneously manage multiple things at the same time, and not just for one patient, but for the whole family. And so I
Yeah.
think that journey was probably inevitable to get there because that's kind of how I'm wired is to uh, just seeing the value of bringing an expert to kind of the primary care level to handle patient care. Uh, we've discussed in the past, you and I, the book Range. Range is a book where I really, that was a groundbreaking book for me in terms of, I think the subtitle of the book Range, I think Daniel Epstein, I believe, is the
Yep.
writer there, is Why the Generalist Trump Specialists or something like I think that's the subtitle. But it's
Mhm.
essentially just story after story of the value of having kind of a generalist mindset in that you see the big picture on everything really, really well. And that's kind of how I'm wired is I really like to see I get in the weeds, a lot with certain conditions, but I feel like if I have a really good grasp of the big picture of myopia management, the big picture of diabetic management, the big picture of glaucoma and dry eye, then I think I'm in a really good place for the vast majority of my patients. And I can handle, 95% of what they need from me. And the rest of it, when I think a healthy thing is to know what you don't know. When I get to the point where I arrive at the edge of what I know and when I don't know, or when I know I can't go on, then that's when I refer to, a colleague to do surgery or something else for that.
Okay. And let's and how many locations do you have for the
We have
audience?
2 locations. Yep, Nebraska and Iowa.
Tell me a little bit about things you ran into that you didn't expect along your journey, whether it's expanding the scope of practice, whether it's going from 1 to 2 locations. What was something unexpected?
One unexpected thing was just how hard it is. I guess I'm in a spot right now where my goal is to have multiple locations, and so I've gone from 1 to 2. And the unexpected thing is I think you have this, I had this perception at least of, hey, I've expanded to 2 locations now. But in terms of the overall, and I would definitely take consultation from anybody that knows better than me at this point, but there hasn't been a lot of scaling that has happened from 1 to 2 that I've really been able to capitalize on. I would say there's been a few positions that have been able to expand and cover, like a billing person at one location can also do the billing and claims at another location. And this is just not just, before we were talking about like clinical care. Now we're just like, I'm really pivoting into more just management operational things.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll go back to the clinical care, but that's kind of a big thing for me was I think the way that I feel like things are best set up and the way that I run things to practice, it probably either needs to go back to a bigger
True.
one location to utilize like the power of scale, or it needs to go to 3 to 5 locations to utilize the power of scale. You know what I mean? And I could get into more details on that, but that's the thing that was a little bit, shocking to me, or not real shocking, but just like unexpected as I continue to grow our practices.
It's the whole, I think we all make assumptions, right?
Yeah.
With it, I think you're right. That is a assumption that is like, hey, you will build it, they will come, right? If you build it, there should be scale. And I think that is that is very insightful. I think Nathan Hayes from iDog actually said something very similar. It's like, hey, unless you get a lot more locations, it's hard to really get that leverage, and quite frankly, it's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that too. Like, I think for me, it's basically instead of scaled, it's basically just doubled the work. So
So
that's an issue, and I think you continue to as we scale or as we continue to hopefully grow, that'll change. But also, just going back to the clinical side that we were talking about, is trying to the difficulty of of basically trying to replicate your own style of patient care is very difficult as well if you don't have specific written down, essentially SOPs for your diseases, right?
Mm.
And I know a lot of doctors and a lot of pure clinicians would kind of bristle at the thought of having like a standard operating protocol for specific diseases, just because, yes, there's a human side to everything. And yes, we have to it's patient to patient, it's personalized medicine, but, we can create really helpful protocols in our practices based upon, what types of equipment each location has. So that on the flip side, it's been valuable. The challenge there has been, unexpected, but also that challenge has helped me realize the power of protocol and the power of, clarifying things into, documents and being clear on exactly how you want patients to be managed, what do you want them to do at their routine evaluation with their intake form, when you want them back for certain conditions, what are you going to do for them at that evaluation for their glaucoma, dry eye. So that's been on the flip side, that the positive component of that challenge.
Okay. Yeah, I think, it's funny. I think you're speaking to the choir here. Basically, that's my background was industrial engineering. So we used to do a whole lot of that. And even in our existing companies, we put a heavy emphasis on process. I think, so I'm a big, I learned a lot about lean manufacturing.
Hmm.
And I'll share a quick story, and I think you'll appreciate this. Um, Back when Toyota was starting to come up in the 50s and 60s, post World War II, they couldn't compete on economies of scale. And so one of the things they had to do was like, we don't have the capital, we don't have the funding to compete against GM and Ford on economies of scale. So we had to find waste. And so they had to find waste in everything they did. And one of the things they found waste in was when there wasn't a high level of agreement of what and how to do a task, or AKA standard work, it caused waste in the process.
Mm.
And so now obviously manufacturing is very deterministic. Healthcare is not always deterministic. So
Yep.
it's a range of how specified you can get with how specific the standard work is. But that was a huge one of the key pillars for Toyota to become the juggernaut they became over the course of the next 50, 60 years to where they are now. And even now, that's sort of a standard. If you look at the Toyota way, that's one of the pillars
Mm.
of standardization and a high agreement of what and how a job is done.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the more books you read on this topic, and you and I could probably geek out on the number of books because there's thousands of them out there on this type of a topic, but from, traction to scaling up to those things, it all boils down to just like the same thing. Be clear, clarity trumps all, clear message, clear core values, and then figuring out how to set big goals, create a scorecard that's going to help you track those goals. So accountability. And then what's your rhythm for checking in on those goals? What's your rhythm for accountability? And it really just boils down to that process of goal, and then like I said, your scorecard, and then your accountability, and that's going to help you execute on those things.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, um, yeah, I know for us, it's it's usually where we first look when there's an issue is like, well, is there
What's
standardized?
the system?
Yeah, exactly. And it's another Demingism. I don't know if Edward Deming, you heard of him?
Huh.
All right. And so I'll tell another quick story. This is
Yeah.
a podcast for you, but not for me. But I'll say, I think you'll appreciate it. Edward Deming was a quality guru, the quality guru. You don't hear about him in the US because, again, post World War II, he was like, hey, we don't need this. We're already kings of the hill. We don't need you here. He came to Japan, and the Toyota and the folks there listened to him, as well as the other manufacturers in Japan. And he's sort of the godfather of quality. And one of the things he says is, when you look at errors, always look at the process first, people second.
Hmm.
Now, not always the case in every single situation. I will say I don't always find that to be 100% true, but I think that's a good framing to say, like, is the system working properly?
Yeah. And well, I think it's a good example of good leadership that doesn't lead with like suspicion towards people either. Like
Mhm.
if you're the type of leader that is always leading with, well, it must have been a personal mistake, it must have been a people problem. Like people are going to feel that from you as a leader if you're constantly like a little bit, because it's almost like a cynicism about maybe people's performance. So if you're
Yep.
always going, well, what type of mistake did you make? Versus if you focus on the system first, that kind of detaches some of the emotional, power that people have towards that system or that job or task that maybe wasn't done up to, standards.
Yeah. And so, why, we talked briefly in your bio that you also are a consultant with iCode and you have 2 locations. What drives you to grow? Like, what makes you tick? Like, why do that?
Why do that? Well, it goes back to what we said right at the beginning. It goes back to core values. It goes back to kind of being clear on a mission. I would say like if I have a personal mission, it would be to, get to the essence of things. I like to break things down into understandable bites, and I like to help people make decisions. So whether it's helping my patients make the best decisions about their eyes to see well for life, or whether it's to help other doctors make really good decisions. I like to post on LinkedIn. I usually post 3 to 5 times. I post several articles a week that I love to read and I love to learn continuously, whether it's through, books, podcasts, research articles, magazine articles, anything like that, anything I can get my hands on. And I love to just find really good content. I love to find a really good article that somebody did a really good job explaining maybe a new treatment in dry eye, or somebody, created a really awesome flow chart on how we should best manage geographic atrophy because of the new drugs. Like that was a paper that I linked to last week. And so when I find that stuff, it's like, man, this would really help me at my primary care practice. So I know it's going to help a lot of other people, So it's it's going back to that. Like, what makes me tick is just that pursuit of continuous improvement, of being generous, and meaning like when I say generosity, it's more I just want to give of what I know. I want to give whether it's through my practice to my patients or whether it's through consulting or lecturing. Like I really enjoy lecturing because I get to give as much as whatever I know that I can possibly give, And so when I can break things down and people can understand things in a new way and make better decisions, then that is a really fulfilling thing for me. So that's kind of what
Cool.
keeps me going.
Right. I think that's, yeah, I think that's pretty, it's a common trait that I see with a lot of, folks who wanna grow, is that innate drive, to just say, "I'm curious. So where is this gonna take me?" So what is it that, we're seeing a lot of changes in the industry, and I'm gonna ask you a couple there's 2 different things that we're seeing, and you're kind of an expert in one of the areas, so I'm gonna ask you separately, normally ask them together.
Yeah.
First question I'm gonna ask you, though, is how are you dealing with staff, cost increasing? And,
Mhm.
yeah, let's start there first, staff cost increasing. How are you dealing with that?
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, um, we have been going back to what we've talked about, trying to create better systems. And we don't have any virtual assistants at this time, but we've considered that. As the practices, as both locations have grown, we really haven't increased we've increased in labor costs, but we haven't really increased in physical bodies at the practice. And the way that we've been successful at that is basically just through what we just talked about with Toyota and your stories there of like, how can we make these processes simpler? How can we use some sort of software perhaps to narrow things down for us or to simplify this process to make it, for example, the insurance verification process. You've got Aloha out there. You've got a lot of different programs out there that can help you do this. How can we do this in a way that's behind the scenes and done in a way that's not in the middle of patient care, so that we do have an offsite, one of our workers is offsite and she does all that. But that's kind of how we've done it. We've tried to streamline, our costs have continued to go up like everybody else has, but we've tried to obviously add more work to everybody's plate, but at the same time, simplify the work that they're doing so it's not so burdensome. And so we know like optometry practices tend to be, and this is probably all across, healthcare, but it feels like optometry practices, there's so many little protocols and processes of paperwork and insurance verification and claim submission. It's just like, mind numbing. And you just think at the end of the day, like, what are we really doing here? Are we just filling out paperwork? Are we just doing all this and that with documentation in the HR? Are we actually like face to face with our patients? So, we've, like I said, we've just tried to focus on when the patient's here, what do we have to do to make our workers just focus on what the journey of the patient, and then create back end processes or have software help us to do the other stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's funny you said another buzzword there that so the three concepts that Toyota looked at, one of them is specifically called overburdening, um,
Mm,
which is they use a Japanese word for it. I think it's called muri, but doesn't matter. But yeah, that was one of the three legs of the stool they looked at. And so yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on that it's a lot of work. And how do we not overburden someone? So part of that is defining what they're supposed to be doing at any given time, making sure it flows well. That's the other thing. So I know in our offices, we put a big emphasis on how the patients are scheduled, because that'll make a serious impact on patient experience and outcomes. If it's too bunched up, or if we just jam people in, 10-minute exams, go, go, go. That's a little tough for the way we're set up and the way we want. Not to say it can't be done. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I'll add one more thing onto that too. I think there's a power in. So we kind of talked about it with, you asked me what makes me tick. And I think what makes people like self-motivated is when they're doing work that they love or
Mm.
work that they enjoy. Right. And so one of the powerful things that I've done at my practice is we've used two different personality profiles. One is called the Working Genius. And we have our team leader. She's certified in the Working Genius, so she can coach. And the Working Genius is essentially like figuring out how we work. Like, how do we work best? Are we visionaries? Are we inventors? Are we galvanizers? Are we enablers? Are we discerners? Or do we have we love just to cross things, across, or put things across the finish line? And the other tool we've used is called the Enneagram. And the Enneagram is something where, and maybe people might be familiar with those, it's an ancient tool that assesses your personality. But what I really like about it is it goes in tandem with Working Genius really well, because the Working Genius is more like how people work well, whereas the Enneagram is the why, the motivation for why people work, why people do what they do. And so I found, and this might sound bad, but I've found like you can put a pretty good load or a burden on an employee as long as you've got the work matched with their genius, and you've got the work matched with what motivates them, right? Because it's the same for me. Even though I'm the business owner, the reason I'm doing these things is not at the end of the day because I want money. I mean, that's nice, but honestly, I'm doing it because I'm intrinsically motivated, because I love to wonder. I love to discern things. I'm an Enneagram 5, so I love to investigate. And it's just like, that's my personality. And so I work really hard because I'm just kind of living out who I am. And so if you can use these tools to find those, the how and the why in each one of your employees, like that's pretty powerful when they get into a position where they feel like they're being seen, heard, and known by how they work and why they work.
Yeah.
You can really motivate them well to do that.
Yeah. And you're right. There's a million and one tools out there that you can
Yeah.
deal with. I think the point is use something to learn people. I think the platinum rule, I treat people how they
Yes.
want to be treated. It's kind of, it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying there. And I
Yep.
agree that that absolutely works well. And I'll flip it on its head a little bit. what I also noticed is that I had to find people who also work well with me. And so,
Sure. Mm.
they might have been, quote unquote, the perfect fit in another
Yes,
scenario, but in this scenario, I was like, hey, not a good fit necessarily. So you're right. It's like putting a puzzle piece together.
it is. That's what makes it fun, you know? I've had that example too, though. You would think like, if this person has this or that personality, they would just fit so perfectly in doing this role. But you're right. If there's got to be a relational dynamic there, and if they don't fit the relational dynamic between you and them, then it's not a great fit either.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as the uh, other side of the equation, right? So we know costs are going up, and so it sounds like you're trying to basically get a more productive team. So a high B or A players who are more productive than your
Mhm.
C or D players. That's one strategy from the cost perspective. From a revenue standpoint, this is where I think you guys really shine. Is how do you deal with lowering reimbursements or stagnant reimbursements with inflation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you deal with it by first, it's understanding at the end of the day, it's basically you have to increase in volume, right? Or you have to increase in revenue per patient, right? That's how you're going to increase your revenue, right? And you can do it both ways. I've honestly like my goal is to increase in volume and revenue per patient. But the best metric that I've used for myself, and I think the newest metric that needs to, I hope, is embraced by every single optometrist is revenue per hour. I think revenue per OD hour is the new greatest, latest metric that should be like, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I always joke, it's like the one ring to
Connection
rule
with
them
mall.
all. Like it's the metric to rule them all because it actually, when you think about revenue per comprehensive exam, if you do a ton of medical at your practice, if you do a lot of the dry eye evaluations, or if you have a lot of, say you've got IPL or thermal pulsation or something like that, that is gonna add to your revenue, but your exam denominator is not gonna change. So it's gonna inflate that. And
Mm,
so you got to have something that compares your time. Time is the ultimate because that's something that compares to both time of recommending contact lenses and glasses as well as managing disease in the clinic. So revenue per OD hour is where you should start. And then you have to look at, hey, how am I utilizing the equipment that I have in my practice, right? How am I, there's one statistic out there that shows it's Richard Edlow, the economist, put out a statistic a couple of years ago that about every year, only about 30% of optometrists bill Medicare for visual fields. So only about 1 out of 3 optometrists are billing for visual fields per year. So that's a lot of visual field units that are doing nothing in practices right now, right? And it's the same for OCT. OCT is about 27 to 28%. So I don't know what that number should be. I think it should be a lot higher than that. I don't think it's going to be 100% just because of the different modalities in optometric practice.
mhm.
But there's opportunity right in our patient base. We really don't necessarily have to like create these extravagant marketing programs to get in a bunch of new patients.
Yeah.
We just got to we got to maximize the patient that's in our chair, uh, find their risk factors for glaucoma, and follow the standards of care of gonioscopy, visual fields, and OCT every year on those glaucoma suspects, and do it more than once a year on the mild, moderate, severe patients. It's finding risk factors for dry eye and AMD and managing those patients appropriately. And that's where, there's no real cost of goods except for equipment, right? There's no real cost of goods for our services. Like if we were to have somebody come back in and we're to utilize a 99214, that's a service that obviously there's chair time and those things you can add in, but we're not selling something that we then have to pay for later. So that's where we see as we consult with practices, the two main issues that there's so much untapped
Mm,
revenue and profit in their practices is both in utilizing equipment and then also in realizing that they can probably code at a higher level than they are. So, most practices across the country, they're like we use a ratio. Again, it's going back to a metric, but one of the metrics that we like to use for practice is called level 3 to level 4.
Hmm.
And really based upon the CMS guidelines, practices that do a lot of medical, they should have their level 3s, 99213s or 99203s, and their level 4s pretty much equal. And honestly,
Really? Oh,
practices that do a lot of medical and a lot of especially dry eye, they're actually probably going to use a lot more 4s than 3s. Now, a typical practice across the country that we've analyzed, they're about a 10-to-1 ratio of using 10 times as many 3s as 4s. And so right there, you just figure out like, hey,
even that
this
out.
isn't,
Yeah.
it's not going to cost you anything to do that other than just checking the 4 instead of a 3 and documenting accordingly, right? That is a really, really easy way to, essentially harvest, several $1,000s, right just from, appropriate billing and coding.
Yeah, that's significant. I didn't realize it was like that. I just assumed I've always heard that, hey, gotta be bell curve distribution, right? That's what, if
Yeah,
you're not in that distribution, it's gonna get
it
automated.
is. It kind of flattens out. It's like, 2s and then 3s and 4s and then 5s is the
Mm,
traditional there. So, and if you were to look at that same graph and you look at optometric data across the country, it is so like,
other
it's
way.
like a
Yeah.
peak at 2 and 3 and then a dive at 4 and 5, just because of the timidity or just like, oh, I don't want to get audited and, just those ideas. But the reality is most of us are practicing in a way that, if you're prescribing a medication and you're managing 2 chronic illnesses, as long as you've documented accordingly, that's a level 4.
Hmm. Um, now you're with iCode, which obviously helps with that.
Yeah,
Do you guys have tools that help with that, or is it an easy way to do that? AI? I mean, AI sounds like you could use AI to help you with that actually.
absolutely. Now we have essentially we just have like a link that you can the first step that we want to help with is just awareness,
Yeah.
right? And there's no shame in all of this, just like anything else. Like if you're going to make any improvements, you just have to start with the cold hard facts, right? And so we have a PDF, just a download that essentially you get a forms, it's a link to Google Forms. You put in your 12 numbers and it spits back out to you exactly where you are right now and where you should start improving. And usually the first step that we recommend is attacking that level 3 to 4. And
Mhm.
then once you've ironed that out or leveled that out, then it's usually figuring out like, okay, what protocol in my practice do I need to improve first? Usually it's glaucoma or it's dry eye. And then if you can kind of figure out, like, get more comfortable with the billing and coding of and managing those chronic conditions, not under their vision plan, but under their medical plan, that's the key.
Yeah, and so, by the way, if you're okay with it, we'll put that in the show notes, the link to that.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, now let me circle back real quick. So, dollars per OD hour, that's the metric that we should look at. Obviously, keep looking at your other metrics if you like it and you're managing with it, like revenue per exam, all those fun things.
Exactly. They're all helpful in
Um,
their own way.
yeah, and you mentioned another one around equipment. Was there a metric around that?
Yeah. So we've created a metric for each piece of equipment. So like if you looked at your total number of visual fields
Mhm.
and you divide that by your refractions. So basically
Oh, okay.
visual fields, so 92083 divided by 92015. What we found in practices that are practicing at a really high level is that should be somewhere between 10 and 25%. So meaning that, you add up all your visual fields and you divide it by the number of refractions, you should be about 1 out of 10 times that you do a comprehensive exam for refraction. That patient probably 1 out of 10 times, patient probably has, disc drusen
Hmm.
or risk of glaucoma or some other condition like a migraine that visual field would be helpful for. Same with OCT. Same with OCT, the nerve, of the macula, of gonioscopy, of anterior seg photos. Whatever that code is, you divide it by refraction. And we've just set a benchmark of divided by refraction is 10% for all of those. You can definitely, if you've got slit lamp camera capabilities at your practice, that should be a no brainer. That's easy to hit 10, 25% if you're really managing a lot of acute disease plus dry eye. Because easily 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 to 8 are going to have dry eye issues that you should be taking photographs on.
Is that effectively saying you should have a certain percentage of medicals in your facility, or is that really saying this equipment needs to be utilized at the 20% rate or 10% rate, or is it both?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
It basically is just looking at like we're backing into it, looking at, glaucoma has a prevalence rate of about 3 to 5% in the
Mm.
population. Uh, Glaucoma suspect, about 10% of patients are glaucoma suspect, have a risk factor for glaucoma. And if the standards of care for glaucoma say that patients that are at risk for glaucoma should have annual gonionoscopy, annual visual field, annual OCT, and then about 10% of them have it, well, then that's kind of how we're backing into that. Just saying, okay, based upon the typical population, if you're really, really low in that, you're probably, if you're 2 or 3%, then you're probably missing some of your patients that have those risk factors that should be evaluated with those things. I'm never going to say, hey, you need to run your equipment more. I'm coming at it from the clinical side of like,
Yeah.
hey, you're probably missing things, or there are probably opportunities where patients have risk factors and you're not finding those things. There's a paper in 2017 that retroactively looked at like 600 macular degeneration patients, or looked at 600 patients. And let's see here, and 25% of them had AMD, but weren't diagnosed as that.
Mhm.
So like, and it was a problem, not just with optometry, it's optometry and ophthalmology. So you're just seeing like, at our routine comprehensive exams, we do a really good job with all those things, but we're probably, if we don't have protocols in place to find those patients, to manage that really well, then there's a good chance that we're missing those things. And
Okay.
we're just trying to figure out, okay, what type of a metric can we use to back into assessing how good we're doing with those preventative models.
And you've got my brain thinking, actually. This is pretty cool. You've got OD per dollars per OD hour, which actually we track that. We also track dollars per open hours and dollars per staff hour.
Love
And
that.
so
Yeah,
we look at all three of them just because they all tell us a little something different. And it's kind of
they
neat
do.
picture. But one of the other things I really like is we track medical rates. We don't track it by equipment, which is really cool because what you're saying is the theme I'm hearing is what is the quote unquote normal? What is it for your area? Because your population could be different.
Right.
And then you should be matching a population, which, a good place to start is national average, right?
Yep.
And so, but your understanding your local population might be slightly different. If they're really young, they may not be as, maybe a little bit healthier and may not have as many issues, might be a lower percentage. If they're older or have genetic dispositions, then it's a different scenario. So it's really understanding what it should be. And then what I heard in there that you didn't say is the confidence to actually do it and code it that way.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of folks that feel, I know I talked to my wife, who's the optometrist, and sometimes she feels uncomfortable, right? It's like, I
Right.
don't really want to. I'm happy with what I'm doing. I know I'm safe here. If I do this, then maybe I'm at risk, right? And so, how have you dealt with that, or how do you work through that sort of challenge?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I work through that every single day, and I would probably be lying if I wasn't saying the reason I create protocols and I think through all this stuff is for somebody else. First and foremost, it's for me,
Yeah.
because I struggle with it every single day. Like, oh, Sandy, I see her every 3 months, even though I know in my mind this is a level 4. I don't, this is probably okay. Let's just do a level 2 or 3. And it's easy to do. You go through that all the time. But the reality is if you know what the value is, what the true value is, right? And if you document accordingly, like if you really, it's really knowable what the codes should be, right? They've really simplified it since the code changes in 2021. So
Uh-huh.
if you're really clear on, hey, this is definitely level 4, and I've documented thoroughly to support that level of coding, then you have to think about it as you're devaluing yourself according to CMS guidelines. You're devaluing the care. And your care isn't about what how much time necessarily how much time or how hard it was for you to manage a patient, like, for example, I can have a patient, if a patient has cataracts and glaucoma and they come in and they're on latanoprost and all I do is a pressure check and I say, hey, your pressures are great. Your cataracts are the same. Your glaucoma is stable, and I have a 7-minute conversation and they leave the door. As long as I document accordingly, that's a level 4. Even though it didn't take me a whole lot of brain power, to do that, that still is that level of care based upon those problems and the risk of that management plan. That takes a higher level of coding. It doesn't matter that it was easy for me,
Yeah.
right? What's easy for me might be really difficult for somebody else, and vice versa. Something that's easy for somebody else might be. So I think we tend to like code on feel of how like complex it was for us. But that's not the nature. So if you really know the codes well and you document well, you just got to follow through and not devalue your care.
Yeah, and I'm gonna bring it full circle here. It's like, when you first started the conversation, you started off with like, I just want to do a couple of things, right? I don't want to necessarily do full scope. You had the challenge with your son. You have you're like, oh man, no, there's more here. And now you've gotten all the way to the point where it's like, why wouldn't I do this, right? And
Yeah.
it sounds like that's been one of your main ways for growth is to
Mm.
practice, just practice the full scope of what you're allowed to practice to. That's opened
Yeah.
up so many opportunities. I mean, if I'm just doing rough back of the envelope math, um, probably 30 to 40, even like maybe even up to double the amount of revenue you could be making depending on how you practice versus practicing full scope. So there's a lot of like just revenues left on the table, and you're not doing anything dishonest or anything illegal
Right.
or unethical, right? It's just practicing and coding properly. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Going back to what you said about the revenue per the hour being the one metric to rule them all, the the way you think about it, the why it's so valuable is because if you look at what I love to do, and this is maybe a next step that you can do for your practice too, is looking at, and for our listeners is, okay, calculate your revenue per OD hour now. And then what we did is we went to, the AOA preferred practice or the AAO preferred practice guidelines or the AOA clinical practice guidelines for glaucoma.
Mhm.
And we looked at, okay, for a mild glaucoma patient, and there's papers that do this already. For a mild glaucoma patient, they recommend this code, this code, this code, and this code. Okay. And the CMS national average reimbursement is this amount. So if we're going to see that patient 3 times and do those codes, and it's going to take us this amount of time, well, then for a mild glaucoma patient, my revenue per OD hour just to see that mild glaucoma patient it's going to be about, $700-800 divided by probably if I saw them 2 or 3 times, by about an hour. Okay. And that's where you figure out like, okay, for glaucoma, then, if, the national average for revenue per OD hour is somewhere around like 450 or so, top 10% of practices are up in the 650 to 700 range, 700 revenue per OD hour. And then if you are to manage myopia in a really myopia management at your practice with, the defocus soft lenses, I won't use any brand names, Ortho-K, anything like that, you're looking at about, $1,000 to $1,200 per hour if you're to break that down into a revenue per OD hour just with that condition. With glaucoma, you're looking at about $600 to $700 per hour. With AMD, you're looking at about $500 to $600 per hour. And of course, you can play with that because you can start to see like, okay, well, maybe I don't need to, I'm going to manage glaucoma, but I know for my glaucoma evaluations, I don't need to be in the room for everything because I'm going to do visual fields, OCTs, and I'm going to have somebody else check the pressure. And then I'm going to
So
come
there's
in.
extra revenue, yeah, because he's not
Exactly.
utilizing
And then
doctor.
when you have
Yeah.
the same revenue and you decrease the time, then your revenue per OD hour goes up. And that's why that number is so valuable. And so using that for the different conditions is super helpful.
And one of the things that we looked at in manufacturing was like utilization of assets. And in other healthcare settings, I worked at the Cleveland Clinic, and one of the things they talked about was doctors need to be busy all day producing because their time is production.
Yes.
Optometry, I love optometry because there's ways a doctor can produce without actually seeing patients,
Yes.
retail sales, contact lens, other procedures that techs can do. And so it sounds like, hey, understanding, it's almost like you're gaming the system, right? It's not one for one trade-off. It is, hey, if you do these
Right.
medicals, you also gain the benefit of parallel work. You can see a patient for comprehensive exam while someone's getting OCT worked out. So you're doubling your revenue. Sure.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's actually a brilliant way of thinking about it. It's really cool. I
Yep.
like that. Um, the so let's switch gears just a little bit, and I kind of want to just learn about you a little bit more.
Okay.
And so I like to so your bio is really interesting. You had an interesting background that I hadn't seen yet. Someone who had a Bachelor of Science in meteorology from
Yeah.
well, so has
Yeah.
that ever come into play? Like, do you ever use that still, or like the thought process? Because it was interesting. I'll just say this: I was in engineering, but I took an elective class in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, and that was my favorite class I took in all my college career.
For
Um,
sure.
and so it was such a cool thing. And I don't know, do you still use anything or any of the concepts you learned
I,
from meteorology?
I still love it. I still love the weather. I'm a farm kid, so I grew up in a town of 400, and the only time I would get a break on the farm was when it rained. So basically my life as, growing up was trying to figure out when is my next
Mhm.
break? When is it going to rain next? And so whenever I would see, the clouds coming in, it would definitely like trigger a joy in me. But yeah, my undergrad is in meteorology and climatology in Nebraska. And there's probably, if you look hard enough, there's probably some tornado pictures out there on the net because I did some storm chasing, and I have a picture that I like to show when I lecture of a basically I was, back in like 2004 in my, Abercrombie and Fitch cargo shorts and my t-shirts, back in the day of like, 20 years ago. And I was basically standing, and there's a tornado behind me, about a mile behind me. And it was the first tornado that we caught that day, May 22nd of 2004. Was kind of some of the last days that I did chase tornadoes. But yeah, I've done that. And do I use it now? I mean, I like to still read. If you look at the Weather Channel, if you look at weather.gov, you can look at what they put out to the public. And then you can also, there's a little link that I love. And that link is basically the weather discussion. So you click on that, and it's actually one of my classmates, one a good friend of mine from undergrad. He actually runs the National Weather Service in the area. So sometimes I'll see Brian's name at the bottom, but they actually like for about two, 3 paragraphs, they'll talk through why they're forecasting the way they are. And so they're looking at different models, and they're taking in, 3 or 4 different models, kind of combining it together and coming up with a final summary of why they think, it's going to happen the way it's going to happen. And I still read those, especially on days where, I don't really get into snow forecasting too much, but I love the spring time when the big, thunderstorms roll in and we have tornado warnings. I love to still be out and about, watch those things, and be involved as much as I can there.
Yeah. That's a cool background. I guess I was gonna say that's your Bill Paxton look, right, from Twister. Back in
Yeah,
2004, right? That's when the first one
that's
came.
right.
It was a couple years afterwards, but yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Oh yeah, that was like my favorite movie in high school, Twister.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. I like the movie too. I was like, I
It
didn't
was
have
great.
anything to do with it, but yeah. Um, so let's time travel a little bit. 4 days after you graduate OD school, what would you give yourself as advice now, knowing what you know now? Obviously, we talked about your full scope of practice. What else would you give yourself as advice?
Ooh, I would say stay true. It goes back to what we've talked about, but just stay true to yourself. I think it's easy to take on other people's dreams and take on other people's, uh, you know, ways about them. And I think there's a good part of that. Like it's great to be, that's the value of working with other people, of getting a lot of exposure to, uh, other experts in that. But I think it's just to, be patient and know that to stay the course. I guess that's how I probably tell myself is be patient, stay the course, but continue to just like clarify what is it that you really want to do. Not as a way of like finding, your passion or anything like that, but like clarifying in a way that what what are you most responsible for, or what is going to create the most impact on, the community around, starting with my son. And so I think, going back, that's probably where I would want to like maybe shift my focus a little bit, because it was more on like me, myself, my own passions
Right.
versus how can I take the focus off myself and just say, what do the people around me need most? And that's where I want to be wired more now. Like, what do the people around me need most? What am I, when my community right now, what is my community in West Omaha, Nebraska that comes to me for primary eye care? What do they need most from me right now? Even though I would love to just do glaucoma and dry eye, they also need their minus, 3 contact lenses. And they also need their 3-year-old to have an exam to rule out any issues there. And, so it's just being mindful of our responsibility as much as our passions.
Excellent. I like that a lot. I think that's some people say that's the key to happiness, is to focus on others and not just
Yeah.
yourself. So Kyle, this has been great. I think we could go for another hour or two, honestly, just digging into metrics and how to run a practice. May do that again, by the way. I would love to
Sorry, level.
have this continue this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, just under my name, Kyle Klute. I post almost daily there. I just love, like I said before, I love sharing things that have helped me practically in my practice. So whether it's a good podcast about leadership, about culture, about revenue, profits, or about clinical management of any sort of disease, I like to post there. I also have a newsletter, Optometry Simplified newsletter, that you can subscribe to, where I kind of put it all together every 2 weeks. So you can find me there, or you can find me at iCode Education, and we do a consulting. It's essentially like a course that has also coaching involved with it, but it's called Comprehensive Optometry Simplified.
Awesome. And then we'll also you also see the link in the show notes to link to your,
Yeah, which
I believe, assessment, right? And so I'd love for folks to check that out as well, to help out their practices as they grow and build their empires.
Amen.
So again, thank you again, Dr. Kyle Klute, for being a guest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was fun. Great conversation.
It was. I really enjoyed it, and thank you, audience, for listening. If you learned something, laughed, please share the podcast, the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube with folks, and subscribe. Thank you again, Kyle, for being on the show. This has been another exciting episode of Optometric Building Empires, and we'll see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.